Okay, so the bus will leave here at 6:30. So everybody who needs a ride on that bus, please make sure that you are here in front of the conference center or the hotel. In front, is it the main hotel or the court? In front of the court where we took the picture yesterday. The bus will wait for you there. It's a UNAM bus. Okay? Do I have to make any other announcements? Oh, okay. There's on the program you would have seen that the first kind of plenary presentation after the second speaker is program quality assurance from the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, and that was going to be combined with something from Pupkowitz. But Pupkowitz already did that at our welcoming dinner. They felt like they needed a little bit more intimate crowd, so that's what they did there. So what we've done, we moved up Niet's presentation to join with PQA. So Niet and PQA will do a joint presentation so that we have a little bit more time in the group sessions. So the group sessions will have 30 minutes extra. PQA will move up. Niet will move up to PQA just before lunch. Yes. All right. So thank you, everybody. We are looking forward to a very exciting day again today. Jan, the mic is yours.
Good morning. I am going to rely on all protocol from yesterday, so it's a good morning, and that's what you get, the protocols at the back end. So thank you. I am Jan Weiss. I'm the Associate Dean for Education at Pacific Lutheran University, which is in Seattle, Washington. Do we have Patrick's slide up? We've been discussing where we live. We're on the opposite end of the United States from the president. So when people think Washington, I want to be very clear that he's here on the East Coast and we are up here very close to the border of Canada on the West Coast and Pacific Ocean. So I just thought I'd put that in context, so when you think of Patrick, you at least are thinking of him that side of the country. This morning, Patrick's going to talk to us about creating enabling learning environments for preparing 21st century teachers. He and I work very closely together. We're about 30 miles away. He's at a large public institution. I'm at a smaller private institution, but we both do teacher education. And as we were listening yesterday to all of the talks, it was amazing how everything is connected and related, and so we were very excited about that. Let me tell you a little bit about our keynote speaker. Patrick Sexton is the Assistant Dean for Teacher Education at the University of Washington that is located in Seattle. From a pragmatic perspective, this means that he assumes the key leadership role for the university's 5 different teacher preparation programs. The University of Washington consistently ranks in the top 5 public universities in the United States. Patrick's background is in arts education, and since 2006, he assumed a leadership role for teacher education at the university. As a university professor, his work focuses on the field of teacher education and teacher policy. He's played a significant leadership role in the university and the state related to policy and teacher education. He served as president of Washington's Association of Colleges of Teacher Ed, and we have 25 colleges in Washington state that trains teachers, and so Patrick was the president, and then he served on the executive committee for 4 years. He regularly serves on state committees that are responsible for recommending policy to the state's governing board. So in the United States, all of our education policy comes from the state level, not the federal government. So it's a little bit different. In talking with Patrick, in letting him talk a little bit about his speech, I felt like I needed to do some Namibian translation prior to when he starts. So you might have to take notes here. He's working on using language that reflects the Namibian context, but that isn't always easy. We refer to your learners as students. So I've learned to make that switch. I think Patrick's working on that. When he talks about basic education from pre-primary to grade 12, he may say P12 education. That's how we refer to it. Also, the term district really should be thought about as your school clusters. I was trying to figure out what school districts are, and they're really like school clusters. In Washington State, we have 294 school districts that serve 1 million children. So a district is a group of schools that are located in a similar area that have primary schools, junior highs, high schools, and is directed by a superintendent. So I think districts is a big one that you might have to make that change. I think he's got the learner part down, and P12, I know he says that. So with that, I'd like to welcome Patrick Sexton.
Good morning. I'm going to point this in the right direction, I promise. You can see we put a map up here to give you a sense of where we were. Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm going to move right in, as Jan will kick me off the stage if I go over time. She has promised to do that, so someone come and catch me if she kicks me off this way, please. During my time today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my role to give you a little bit more context for the things that I'm going to talk about as I get into the meat of my presentation, because I think that it's very important. And then I'm going to explore two big ideas that might help frame your thinking as you think about renewal or revision of teacher education here in Namibia. Oh, that's the laser. That's not helpful. There we go. Okay. First, I want to talk about my 5 programs. I'm not going to get into details about all of them, but I will say that when the dean first came, I was at the university, I was in this role, and she came and she said, 5 programs? Why in the world would you have 5 teacher education programs at one university? And our answer was very clear. We have different kinds of students that need different kinds of experiences, and we are serving different kinds of schools throughout our region and the state. And so we do our best to match our program to both our students or our learners' needs, our candidates' needs. We call our students candidates often. They're candidates for their certification, and the schools, because not every school is different. All of my programs are also at the master's level, which I know is not the case here. So think about that when you think about what I'm talking about. I have about 200 candidates a year that we provide their teacher certification. It's a mix of elementary, secondary, and special education. Those are all different areas, and we do all of the subjects at secondary. The length of the programs is between 1 year and 1.5 years, or 6 quarters. And we work with about 50 partner schools, or more than 50 partner schools, in 10 districts, or 10 different clusters throughout our state. And I'm going to, again, point the laser. Okay. My programs regularly rate in the top 10. If that thing is important to you, then it is important. If it is not, then let it go. All of my programs are characterized by extensive mentored internships. And mentored field, oh, thank you. I forgot to take my water. Mentored field experiences. My students, all of them, in every single program, are in schools every quarter that they are with us. Some of them start small, and their field placement grows to 13 weeks of full-time, 5 days a week. And some of them are 4 days a week for the entire program. And some of them, one of them, is training teachers that are already teaching but don't have their certification. I think there's a similar program or has been here. And we are working with them as they are teaching to gain their certification at the end of their first year of teaching. Our candidates are very diverse compared to the state's teaching corps. In the context is very different, but it is very important in our state that our teacher corps matches the demographics of our student population. And right now that is not true, and we're working very hard to increase the diversity of our cohorts. And this last thing, this point becomes very important later on, so hold on to it. All of my programs support poverty-impacted, culturally and linguistically diverse schools. And that is a commitment of my programs, that is a commitment of the college, it is a commitment of the university. And it becomes very important that all of those people are committed in doing that work, because it's not easy work, as you know. Okay, my role. I'm the assistant dean, and I have 4 jobs. First job is to make sure that all of those programs have the resources that they need to get the best out of their teacher candidates. I am in charge to make sure that they are learning from one another, that when we do something over here, that it has application for this program over here. And that is my main job, as I see it, as support to my directors and my 5 programs. I work on compliance. Are we meeting the state regulations? And if we're not, what do we need to do to fix that? And then, as Jan mentioned, I won't go into this, I do a lot of state policy work with our professional organization and the state legislature. Okay. I was so excited when I heard the 2 speakers yesterday, because I think the things that I have to talk about build exactly on what those 2 fabulous speakers shared with us yesterday. I am going to take a little bit of a deeper approach, a little bit. So if those are the things that we want, how might we get them? And I am in my Washington context. I am not in your context. So I don't anticipate that what I am telling you is something that you will be able to do. But I will give you a framework of how we thought about doing our work that may very well translate to your context, to think about how you might use a framework like this to revise the work that you are doing. But when I think of 21st century learners, these are the things that I think about. You will see, if you read them, they resonate well with what we talked about yesterday. I will not go into all of them except for, whoops, 1. Supposed to come into an underline. All right. No, I'm not going to talk about these at all. Sorry, that's later. All right, my 2 big ideas. 2 big ideas. You test me. You see if I come back to these. I wanted to say one other thing about those 21st century learning skills. Since I'm not going into them, I want you to hold them in your head. I want you to hold what the speakers said yesterday in your head, and you see if you can make the alignment to what I'm talking about. And later, we can talk about that in the questions and answers. And you tell me how good of a job I did. All right. I'm going to talk about alignment and feedback loops. And we're going to explore those things in 3 sites. A what? I'm going to talk about core practices, what we teach our students to do. I'm going to talk about practice-based teacher education, how, or some ways, how, the how of doing that. And then assessment. Ways of knowing. I'm going to talk about just a couple of ways of knowing that we discovered whether we were doing a good job or not. But you will see, if you listen carefully, that assessment is actually built in to this entire framework. All right. So, we believe that there must be alignment. I'm going to talk about alignment here. Alignment between the learning, the enabling learning opportunities that we have in teacher preparation must align to the learning opportunities that we want our teachers to enact in P12. That if I'm teaching my candidates to do this kind of practice, and then they go into schools and the only practice that they see in schools is this kind of practice, then I have a complete misalignment. Okay? I have to mirror those things. They're not the same. They're not exactly the same. We have many different opportunities and constrictions in each of those settings, but they have to mirror one another so that the practice that I'm teaching my teachers to do and the way that I teach them to do it matches to some degree what we want to see in P12. Okay, feedback loops. In order to get that alignment, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. What do P12 learning environments look like now? Right? So we don't want this, so we have to know deeply, what does this look like? What do schools look like now? What am I preparing them to do tomorrow? Then I also have to know, what is our shared vision for what we want this to look like in the future? So that I am preparing my candidates not just to go in and reproduce. I am not talking about reproducing what is already there. I am talking about understanding what is there so that they can be successful, but also, where do we want to go? Right? Where do we want to push them? And how are they then, as teachers, they cannot do this alone. It is not all on their backs, but they are part of the disruption that takes us from where we are to where we want to be. And when you think of those 21st century learning skills that we talked about yesterday, where are you and where do you want to be? And what is your shared vision between your schools, your university, your agencies, your ministry? Are you all on the same page about where it is that you want to go and what role teachers will play in that disruption? And disruption is difficult. And then we must ask ourselves, what does novice teaching look like? I taught them how to do this. They passed my test, but can they really do it? Can they really do it in practice in schools? And I must know that before they leave my doors, before I sign and say, yes, you can have your certification. And I must actually know, once they get into the field, what can they do when they're there? What constraints are there on what I taught them to do? And how can I help alleviate those constraints and barriers? So, this is what it looks like if we're putting it all together. You'll see that they work with one another. And as I go on, I will not be able to talk about alignment solely and feedback loops only. You will see how they come together in the examples that I'm going to talk about. And one more thing. Working this way, if we continue our feedback loops, if we continue this work, we're never, ever done. Because the schools are always changing, because we are always changing, society is always changing, the communities that our schools sit in are always changing. And so this work is never done. So you all have jobs for a very long time. Okay. I said we're going to talk about this in 3 different sites. First, I'm going to talk about core practices. A what? I want you to be very clear. This is not the only what that we teach them, but this idea of core practices, for many of our programs, it frames the what that we teach. And core practices were developed, I'm going to go back for a sec. Core practices were developed by a set of researchers. And I have some information. I can give you some citations, and you can go and do lots of exploration. I won't talk about all the researchers, but they will be familiar names to you. Okay. These researchers tried to push us from what teachers know, where most of our research had been, into what are teachers actually doing. And they started to describe practice that we could teach teachers to do. And they're big, the grain size is big, right? It's not many little practices. It's not a checklist. If you do this, you will get this result. It's if you do these kinds of things, and I promise, you're saying, well, show me the core practices. I will show you one version of them, because there is no definitive list of core practices. They are constantly getting feedback and evolving what they look like, and they have to be context specific. So that what would be a core practice and the way that that would work in the University of Washington may be something very different as to how it would work here. They're learner-centered. We talked a lot about that yesterday. They rely on deep content knowledge. These are not separate from content knowledge. They must have content knowledge at the center, although none of them, you will see, talk about any particular content knowledge. And they have to be responsive to and supportive of learners' cultural and linguistic backgrounds. And we talked quite a lot about mother tongue yesterday. It came up a lot. And those are different issues than we have, but there's some parallel and some similarity about how you support learners with being who they are and who you would like them to become collectively with the community. Okay. So here we see our first feedback loop. Those researchers that I talked about, they did not sit in the ivory tower at the university and make these practices up. They were in schools. They looked at what teachers were actually doing. They looked at all of the research and they said, okay, what are teachers doing and how can we describe this? And they worked with teachers and they worked with schools and they described practices, and then they went away and they did what researchers have time to do that classroom teachers don't. They made them into manageable chunks that could be spread across contexts. And then they took those and they went back into the classroom and they said, these are the practices. Do they work? How would this change if I was in San Francisco or New York or Alabama? What would this look like if I was in all of these different places? So we see our first feedback loop here. Okay. I'm going to show you a list of these core practices in just a second, and I'm going to talk deeply about one of them, but I need to give you some context about where these come from in this particular program. This is the Seattle Teacher Residency. It is one of my programs. It is my newest program. It was developed when the school district, the largest school district in our area, Seattle Public Schools, the teachers union, the labor, the school district, labor, a nonprofit organization, and the university were seeing patterns in our highest poverty schools where teachers were just turning over. They would go in and then they would leave. They would go in and then they would find a job in a higher socioeconomic status school. And we wanted to fix that. And so we had some theories of action about how we would fix that. And we said, if we recruit a group of teachers and we give them some money and we help to pay for their college, and we train them inside of those high poverty schools, in those districts, you'll see this theme come back later. If we train them in that situation and we support them with a lot of mentoring, we do a lot of supervision in all of my programs, we do quite a bit in this program. These students are in those classrooms 4 days a week. They have class on Tuesday nights and on Fridays. If we do this together, maybe they will stay. Maybe they will stay in those schools. And this has proven to be true. But where we started was developing collectively, all 4 organizations, what is it that we want them to know and be able to do? And we developed this set of core practices based on the research that I talked about, because this was the kind of practice that was happening in those schools for excellent teachers, but not all students were receiving it. Right? We had mentors that were there doing it, and so we could place our students with those mentors. But we needed to actually say, how would we teach them in the 5 quarters that they're with us? And I won't talk about all of these, but I am going to talk just a little bit about one of them. Assessing learning to guide instruction. So when our candidates come to us, they think, because they have had 12 years of observation in schools, somebody talked about that yesterday, they think assessment from a student's point of view is a paper and pencil test. And we have to first get them to understand that that is not the case. That assessment is, as much as it is about understanding where that learner is, it's much more about understanding what you have done in your practice that is working and not working. And that there are summative assessments, and those are important things. And having students achieve and understanding that achievement is very important, but it's equally important to understand what are you doing and what have you done, and how does this data affect what you are going to do tomorrow? How does this assessment guide your instruction? And the other thing that we need to get them to understand is that this assessment is not just the paper and pencil test, that it's in the conversation with the students. You'll see later some pictures of my novices, my candidates, having conversations with students, And they are assessing those students in that same moment. They are understanding what I am saying. Are they getting it? Are they understanding? What might I need to do next in order to increase their understanding and learning? Okay, so those are core practices. That is a what. How might we do that? If we were going to use these core practices to define a program, to design, what would that look like? And so I'm going to talk about a practice that we have developed in teacher education called practice-based teacher education. This is a how. How do we get them to do this? And I want to preface this by saying that there are many ways that we do this. I'm showing you one example, and I will admit it is a resource-intensive example. I want to undercut that. You will all sit there and say, how could I possibly do that? Later on, we could talk about different ways that we could do it. This happens to be a particularly resource-intensive example, but it is very rich, and so I wanted to share it with you. Okay, I'm going to share a series of pictures, and I'm going to ask you questions, and I want you to shout out some answers. Where are we? A classroom. Yes, we're in a third grade classroom. Who are these people? Teacher, we know students. Yes, the teachers. Who's the teacher? Who's the classroom teacher? That's the classroom teacher. Who's that other person? The assistant teacher? That is my, you would call professor. This is my faculty member. What are they doing? What do you think they're doing? They're doing a math lesson together. These two people work together to do a math lesson together. What you don't see in this picture is my 30 candidates standing at the back of the room, watching what the classroom teacher and the professor are doing. Okay, where are we now? Picture on the left. Anybody? This is a teacher education classroom. It is in, sometimes when we are partnering with schools that have enough room, we do it in the teacher's lounge, we do it in the library. In this case, this is a very low income school, and there is a resource center, a community resource center that is attached, that is not used at the time that we needed it, and so we are in one of their resource rooms. And who are these people? My students, yes, and the instructor. This is class at school. What are they doing? They are learning what they're going to be teaching their learners. They have learners, and you'll see a picture of that in a second. So my faculty member is modeling the lesson for them based on what she would do after the lesson that she did with the cooperating teacher, the classroom teacher. And she's working on two levels. She's talking to them about what they would do as teachers and also showing them what she would do as a teacher, right? So she's working, this is what you'll do with your learners, and this is what you need to be thinking about as a teacher at the same time. And on the picture of the right, what are they doing? Practicing. They are rehearsing. We call this rehearsals. There's a lot of literature on this if this becomes something interesting to you. And who's sitting there? We add one more person. You can see the learners are not there yet. Oh, I'm not going to do that. You can see my instructors here are my candidates. This person here, she's a doctoral student. She's helping to support this class and learning to be a teacher educator at the same time. So they are rehearsing, and now what are they doing? They're teaching. They're enacting the lesson. You'll see the other people that are standing behind. You see my professor there. Those other people are other candidates in their learning group, and they are watching. And these two teachers, these two novices, are going to get feedback later on what it was that they do, but they're also getting feedback right now. They try this, they try it this way. Did they get the result that they want? Did the kids actually do what they wanted them to do? And are they hearing from them through discussion the mathematical ideas beginning to emerge? Okay. So we see our feedback loops built in here. Why is this powerful? This is a powerful practice because everyone in the room is learning at the same time. They are learning different things, but they are learning at the same time, and you will see that this keeps my professor, she is learning about this school context and what's really happening inside schools. You see this alignment being reinforced by the feedback she's getting by being in that school. She's also learning, did her instruction become real for her candidates? Is what she did previously, actually, could her candidates do what she wanted to do? The candidates are learning about the students are learning about their learners, right? The learners are having additional adult time. My doctoral students are there learning how to become teacher educators, and the classroom teacher is getting professional development on current practices, as well as more information about his learners, because they debrief afterwards, and all of my candidates will report back to him what those learners were able to do and not able to do, so that he can use that in his instruction going forward. This doesn't happen by accident. It takes an incredible amount of planning and organization. It is resource intensive, but it is so rich. It is so rich. Okay, now I'm going to talk about assessment and a few ways of knowing. We have many, many ways of knowing, but a few ways of knowing how well we are doing. And I'm getting a clue here that I've got a few minutes. Oh, I'm good. Okay, this is a partial map of our assessment system at a very, very high level. You can see that we have both institutional and state-required assessments at both the in-program or the pre-service level and the post-program or the in-service level. What you don't see here, for sure, I cut it off, I didn't have room on the slide, is anything about selection, anything about admissions, and I believe the distinguished speaker who comes later will speak a little bit about that. But I want to talk about two of these, and we'll see how far I get. Data on employment. How, you might ask, does data on employment impact your learning environment? How's that possible? I will tell you. And this is very different in my context as it is in your context, because in some of my programs, like the one I talked about earlier, Seattle Teacher Residency, those students are going to work in this set of schools, right? It's very closely aligned in that way, and so the curriculum of the schools becomes the curriculum of the teacher education program. Is very aligned. But in most of my programs, they are going to one of our, how many districts do we have? Almost 300 districts, right? They're going to one of those districts, and they do things very, very differently, and they're resourced very, very differently. As I will talk in a minute, we have some that we hope that they go to, and we plan for that. So we looked at data and employment. All right, about 10 years ago, a little bit more than that, definitely more than that, we changed our college mission. And our college mission, I talked earlier about culturally, linguistically diverse, poverty-impacted schools. We said yes. We said we want our research and our efforts to make a difference for those students and those communities in our state and in our nation that need the most, that have rich assets that we don't yet understand, but that need to be working with us. So, we thought one way of thinking about this is that our candidates would be successful in poverty-impacted, culturally, linguistically diverse schools. And so we looked and we thought, of course they are. If we are teaching them to be the best teachers that they can be, of course they are successful in those schools. And for the first time, we decided to look at the data. And we looked at the data, and what we found is that our students, though we hoped for them to go to these schools, were going to higher income, less diverse schools by and large. We were not getting the outcome that we thought we were or that we wanted to get. And so we had to ask ourselves, what is wrong here? What could we do so that our candidates could go and stay, because those candidates that were getting jobs in those poverty-impacted schools were leaving as soon as they could. They were going to more well-resourced schools as soon as they could. And in our country, there's a job opening, you apply for it, you get it, you're done. Nobody can tell you that you have to stay. This is our context. So we looked and we said, what would we need to change? And we changed many, many, many things. We changed syllabi. We changed assessments. We built the practice-based work that I just showed you, because that school, though you might not be able to tell from there, those children are very poverty-impacted children, and there are about 19 different languages in that school that I showed you earlier. And one of the most important things that we changed was where we had them do their placements, which schools we partnered with. We chose not terrible mentors in poverty-impacted schools. We didn't go there. We chose the best mentors that we could find, and we worked to support the schools so that our teachers could learn in the context of the schools that we most wanted to serve. And there was a huge change for us to change almost all of our partners. And let's look at the data. So, this is before the change. I will explain quickly. You see 100, it goes 0 to 100 on both of the axes. 100 is high poverty. All of the children are living in poverty. 0 is none of the children are living in poverty. The blue dots is where they did their student teaching, where we placed them. And the green dots are where they got their first job. This is what we discovered. This is what we're getting. You place them in low poverty schools, they go to low poverty schools. This drove some of the change. Let's look at this region. This is where we want them to be. We can't just say, go there. We actually have to teach them how to be successful. We have our learning environments, again, have to mirror the learning environments that are going on there. I have to teach them, I'm teaching you this practice, and this is what's happening in those schools for a variety of reasons. How do we collectively teach you to be disruptors and actually be successful in those schools so that we're getting more of what we want, because the schools want to change as well. And here's the data after the change had begun for a few years. From 2010 to 2015, we see in that region a migration to more poverty-impacted schools. Yeah? So we said, great, we're not done, but good, we're on the right track. We're doing the right things. So the things that we talked about, this data, informed our practice and our learning environments that we created in very substantial ways. Okay, now I'm very quickly going to talk about performance assessment. There was some talk yesterday a little bit about performance assessment. I'm going to go through things very quickly because I don't have a huge amount of time, but I can talk about these later, or in coffee, or at Joe's tonight, or wherever you like, because I could talk about, this is my jam, I could talk about this stuff forever. Okay. So the EdTPA is an in-service performance assessment. It is content specific, it has 15 rubrics, it is an authentic assessment of practice. They have 3 prompts: planning, instruction, and assessment. You see that that's something that you train your teachers to do. They respond to prompts. They submit lesson plans and instructional materials, assessments from the students themselves and what they did with those assessments, and they have multiple videos of their teaching. It's externally scored. We worked together with our state agency to find an assessment that both provided us feedback on our students as well as accountability at the state. It's a huge investment on everyone's part. It costs the students $300 to take this assessment. They cannot get their certification in the state unless they get it. So we try our best to wrap it into financial aid and those other things, but we do our best, yeah? But we get incredible feedback and information from this. Rubric 13, I think it's rubric 13, that is about, it's part of assessment, and it is not about the assessment, it's about providing feedback to students and that the students then know what to do with that feedback. And we discovered early on that our candidates were doing pretty well. On the whole, they were passing the assessment. But we look at rubric 13 and they're not doing so well. It's our lowest rubric. So we ask ourselves, what do we need to change? Because our students don't know yet how to provide students with feedback that they can use. Right? And so we look at all of our syllabi and we do all of our processes to figure out what is that we need to change. At the same time that we were implementing this, the state is developing something called the TPEP, which is the Teacher and Principal Evaluation and Growth Program. It is important only, you don't need to know all of these things, but it is aligned to the EdTPA. Because both of them ask teachers to set goals, both of them ask teachers to understand their learners, both of them ask teachers to evaluate progress and to set learning goals for themselves about what they're going to do different in the future to get better results from their learners. And you can also see, if you look at this column, this is the Seattle Teacher Residency again, and this is just one of the elements on each of those. You see the core practices. We did the work of saying if this is the performance assessment in service and this is the performance assessment that they're going to be asked to do, what do our core practices, and I have a handout on this that I can actually get to you at some point, that shows alignment between all of those things so that our candidates do a very little bit of translation. Because when we ask them, we teach them in this way, and then we assess them in this way, and then we assess them again in this way. They don't know what to do, and the cognitive load, the work that they have to do to get from here to here to here is just too much, and they leave us. And so when these things are aligned, when they mirror one another, they're more likely to stay. Okay, all right. I'm being asked to wrap up, and that's very good, because I'm done. I'm just going to read this because I like the words that I wrote, so I'm just going to read my summation. My main point is not to suggest that you take up a particular vision of practice or practice-based teacher education and the assessment system that I shared. It is not that. Rather, it is to say that the ways in which you organize your teacher preparation programs and your curriculum and your learning environments, your assessment system in service should reflect, not be the same as, it should reflect what's happening in schools and where you want them to go, and should have ways for all of you, the ministry, the program, the schools, to understand how well you are doing collectively. Thank you very much.
I'm speaking after a tall person. Thank you, Patrick. That was very, I know the program, and I hope you were able to draw some parallels to ways to elevate what you do with your teachers. So thank you once again, Patrick. And on behalf of the University of Namibia, I'd like to give you a gift from them.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we get to hear from Professor Erica Maas, who is Director of Academic Affairs. It's out of the Vice Chancellor's office at University of Namibia. So, Professor Maas.
Thank you very much, Jen. Patrick, thanks for a very eye-opening keynote address. And I think I speak on behalf of the audience here if I say that we fully buy in to your two big ideas, the alignment and the feedback loops. I think we cannot move without paying attention to that. The question is, what is the current state of affairs in Namibia in general and the University of Namibia in particular? With regards to these two issues. I think this is where we need to reflect as a university and as a nation and see where we stand. Now, yesterday, Honourable Minister Kanji Murangi commented on the challenges of our students being exposed, our student teachers being exposed to a homogeneous teaching environment at UNAM, but then be expected to go and teach in a whole new reality and a diverse range of realities out there. Clearly, this needs to change, but how? I think your research was very powerful to show that how information about your employment history changed what you did. And I think it's something, I'm not saying we need to do the same, but I think the message here is very clear that we cannot just train our teachers and then send them out and hope for the best. And I think this is unfortunately something that is still happening to a great extent at UNAM. We are talking about incentives to keep them in rural schools. And in Namibia, unfortunately, when we talk about incentives, we talk about money. We need to pay them to stay there. And I think this was not your message. Your message was not that we should pay people to spend their times in rural schools. The message was, for me, so powerful to say that we need to prepare them. First of all, and I will come back to that, we need to admit the right students. We need to admit the people with a passion. And then we have to foster that passion so that they will stay there, so that the rewards become far more than monetary rewards. That the rewards is the change that we are bringing to that. So for us, it's a little bit more difficult when we think about our mission. I think as our national university and the biggest provider of teachers in the country, we do have the mandate to serve all schools. We do need to train for all schools, both the affluent schools and the poverty-stricken schools, the rural schools. The problem in our rural schools is not only the problem of the learner, it's very much the problem of the teacher. The fact that the teacher may not have a home to stay if he or she is assigned to that school. That there is actually no school, that it is a tree or it is a tent. So the challenges are huge. But we've heard yesterday this is the century of complexity. And we need to find solutions for that. So within our teacher training programs, we need to find ways not only to expose students to a wide range of realities, but to actually prepare them and actually incite them about the possibilities of what is out there in the field. And I agree this is a tall order, but yesterday we talked about the fact that what are the qualities that we want to see in our learners in the 20s or the 21st century teacher. We talked about innovation, creative thinking, thinking out of the box, all of these things. Now, if this is what we expect from our student teachers, is this not what we should expect from our teacher educators? So we can find a solution to this problem. How do we do this? Personally, I believe that we are in a unique situation with a world of opportunities that just waits for us to make use of these. I believe that we need to form smart partnerships with industry and the ministry to develop model schools in our rural areas. Model schools, because you know, when Patrick, when you talk about we have to mirror what is happening in the schools, I thought, yeah, I'm not sure whether we should mirror what is happening in the schools or whether the schools should mirror what we are doing. Because it's a bit of a scary thought in some of our schools if we want to mirror that. We need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of it. But I would like for us to develop with partners, and we have powerful partners right here in this room today. We have to develop with our partners model schools so that the schools can mirror our practice that they see in there. And I do think that this is possible. This brings me to quite a disruptive thought. Yesterday we had some statistics from our ED on qualified teachers and the percentage of qualified teachers and underqualified teachers and unqualified teachers. And I was just thinking last night, how do we define a qualified teacher? I know the ministry's definition. I know it's about years of studying. It's about a professional teacher qualification of a certain number of years and exposure. But is that what a qualified teacher is? Somebody who went through 3 years and now has a certificate with a professional teacher qualification. Is that a qualified teacher? I think when we listened to the learners yesterday, I thought, maybe some of those teachers they pointed out to us as undesirable, the teachers they do not want, are they unqualified in our definition? Or are they actually qualified in our current definition? Are they qualified in that they do hold a teacher qualification? But they do not have the passion, they do not have the understanding, they do not have the focus to make the difference. So maybe, and I would like to coin a new term and say maybe we need to start talking and get some statistics in our different regions, and that can only be done through research, on what percentage of functionally qualified teachers do we have. And we may actually find that some of those underqualified or unqualified teachers that we are currently classifying as such may actually be functionally qualified. So maybe that's just a thought I want to leave with you. The University of Namibia, as you've heard yesterday from our Vice-Chancellor, is embarking on a very innovative, disruptive curriculum transformation process, where we are changing everything. We are not revising our curricula, we are transforming them completely. In our new proposed curriculum framework, we are deliberately opening up opportunities for practice-based learning and alternative assessments. We are opening up opportunities, space and time for the development of competencies and skills. We are moving away of thinking that we have to cram this curriculum with a lot of content, although deep content knowledge is important, and we will have to find that balance. But we are deliberately going for a new framework where staff and students will have opportunities to develop skills, to become more practice-based. It's now up to our teacher educators to maximize the returns on this investment in our new curriculum, to take charge of these opportunities and make full use of that. This brings me to Patrick's second big idea, the feedback loops. Ladies and gentlemen, I think for too long at the University of Namibia, we have neglected the importance of research to inform our programs. Not research per se, we are doing fine on research, we are doing research. But in the context of what we heard this morning, I think we are neglecting the opportunity that research brings us to inform what we are doing in our teacher preparation programs. And I'm not talking about research done by our student teachers or even by our master students. I'm talking about research done by our teacher educators, by our staff in the Faculty of Education. And I would like to talk directly to my HOD postgraduate studies there. I think, Silas, I really think that there is an enormous task to direct research within the Faculty of Education, to develop a research agenda to inform teaching practice. You know, I've been on the UNAM Senate for 35 years now. Oh, it's a lifetime. But I'm yet to hear an argument coming from any faculty for that matter, but also from the Faculty of Education, I'm yet to hear an argument for a curriculum change that is based on evidence through research. I'm sorry to say this. I hear a lot of arguments, and we're all sitting on that Senate here, there's a lot of arguments about we need to change because this is what the stakeholders want. And how do we know that? We call them together in a room like this and we ask them, what do you want? And we don't care about empirical information at all. It's just how you feel. It all depends who turned up today and who actually had other commitments and could not turn up today to tell us what the stakeholders want. Ladies and gentlemen, this needs to change. Professor Jonathan Janssen yesterday challenged us, and I want to conclude with this. He challenged us to face up to our ghosts. What are our ghosts? Now, I think there are many, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I want to address two of our ghosts. Our Vice Chancellor mentioned yesterday the intention of UNAM to increase admission criteria for our student teachers. And this elicited a round of applause from the floor. But it also ruffled some feathers. Why? Because it brings us to the core of our dilemma in this country. The disconnect between what we know the right thing is to do and the stark realities out there in the country. And in facing this ghost, we will have to find this balance between our short-term goals, having a body in front of every classroom for all our kids out there, and our long-term goals, to prepare a skillful, competent 21st century teacher with the ability to become a nation builder. It's not going to be easy. So how are we going to do that? And I leave that to our staff. I leave that to the critical, innovative thinkers that we have appointed at the University of Namibia. But ladies and gentlemen, it would be senseless to increase the admission criteria for our student teachers. And with admission criteria, I'm not only talking about 30 points or 35 points or whatever points. I'm talking about aptitudes and attitudes and personality, because those are the things that we really need. But it would be senseless to increase the admission criteria for our student teachers if we do not take a critical look at the requirements of our student educators. The mirror must start right there. If we accept this idea of Patrick that we have to mirror the learning environments, we also have to critically evaluate the requirements of those who are taking charge of that learning environment at the university. And here again, we need to talk about academic qualifications, attitude, personality, research, passion. We need to look at that. Let me then conclude with an issue that I'm observing, and I want to put this perspective here. I am not a qualified teacher. I've never done any professional qualification in teaching. And what I'm saying is what I'm observing from my office responsible for academic programs. And it's true, so that it may be a perception, it may be that things are different on the ground, but take note that it's not visible. Take note that the perception out there. And this is the purpose of our current teaching practice and school-based studies setup that we are having. My observation and my perception is that it's more of a ticking of the checkbox to make sure, yes, we are assessing our students. It's not a teaching opportunity, and it's most definitely not a learning opportunity, as we've seen in this powerful example that we have here. So I want to leave this thought with our staff in the Faculty of Education. How can we make teaching practice and school-based studies a more powerful learning and teaching opportunity, not only for the learners, but for the student teacher and the teacher educator. I thank you.
So that was a really insightful response from somebody who is not a teacher educator. So I think she did her reading and thinking about what this means and the idea of schools that we want to be teaching our learners to think, to be innovative, and our university lectures and classrooms should be the same thing. So the idea of making those come close together will be really powerful for Namibian education. I want to thank our rapporteur, Dr. Africa Zulu from the Katima campus, who has been so dutifully writing quickly, and we'll get to hear from him later. With the permission of the dean, I'd like to say, can we hold the questions for after so that we can move forward? So I think we will do that. So I want to thank Patrick and Professor Maas and our rapporteur for this session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We lost some time in starting with our session, therefore I will immediately want to start so that we can try to stick to the program as indicated. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. She's a professor in pre-primary education and works as second vice head of the school responsible for educational issues in teacher education. She has more than 20 years experience of teacher education in Finland, and she has participated in several research and development projects internationally and nationally, and worked as a Fulbright scholar. With these few introductions, I would like to invite Professor Vunutinen to come and give us the keynote address. Professor, the floor is yours.
Vice Chancellor, dear colleagues, good morning. I decided to start my presentation with a landscape photo because my respondent is a geographist. So I think that this is the good start to introduce myself, where I'm coming from and what is my background. Here you can see a photo very close to my university. I'm coming from the eastern part of Finland. And this is the view, or this is the all resources what we have and what we use for our economics, or our well-being, or our education. So nature, clean and green, in summertime green, wintertime white, nature is our resource for well-being. Forest is our resource for economics, and lakes is also for well-being and incomes. And all this are background also for our education. We put lots of emphasis on the local circumstances. All what we start are the resources, the local environmental resources, and that's the starting point for our education. This morning I'm going to focus on the quality teacher education in the 21st century time, and sharing the Finnish example, especially focusing on the student entrance exams and how we select the students for our teacher education. And that's something what we are really now doing. That's under the process. We are not completed this process, but we are very much working on this. So it's really good time to reflect this with you and to have your feedback and comments for our procedure. But before we continue, it's my first question for myself when I starting to prepare this presentation went to the word quality. What is really quality in teacher education? We have been talking about quality in teacher education now 2 days almost, but I actually haven't heard a clear definition for that, what we really mean about the quality. In our framework, it means mainly the three things when we evaluate a quality in teacher education. It means the relevance. That's very much what Patrick talked in his presentation, that the education is relevant for the society and for its purposes. Secondly, it means the transparency. It means that everybody knows what we are aiming for, what are our goals, and how we are going for that. Processes in the teacher education are transparent for everyone. And of course, the effectiveness, that the outcomes are effective enough, what we are purposing. If we take a student into the teacher education, how many of them we can complete in the education, that there are not dropouts. We have to ensure that there are not dropouts. So these are the issues I hope that you think about when I'm now starting to talk about the current trends in our teacher education developments, that how successfully we can indicate these quality factors in our system. For the background, I start with some background information about the teacher education developments in Finland to better understand why we are now changing a student selection system in the whole country. First time ever this year, the number of the applicants for the teacher education decreased. Teacher profession in Finland has been very well valued. We have had lots of applicants for the teacher education, often more than for medical sciences. So we can select the best students from the country. But situation is changing. It changed already a bit. This year we had less applicants than year before. And we have to react for that already, immediately. What is the reason for that the trend is going down? We don't have standards for teacher competencies. We don't have a national framework for what are the really unified standards for teacher profession. We have done a lot of research on that, finding out what teacher educators think, what are the competencies. And according to research, we have found out that along the history, there is a lot of variation about these competencies, or teacher educators or different stakeholders' perceptions. What are the competencies? On the other hand, teacher educators who are well prepared for teacher education, they all have a PhD, they have an experience in basic education, they all have an experience in administration. They still think very subjective way what are the teacher competencies. And now we have started to create a unified system for the whole country to increase the equality for evaluating our teacher education system. The third issue, what we need to develop, is especially the in-service teacher education. It's not very systematically or well organized in our country. We have a very effective pre-service education. The students, what we take in the program, nearly 97% will complete it in 4 or 5 years. So it's rather high percent for the comparing the other disciplines. But the support after their in-service education has been in lower level, a little bit lower level than in terms of the pre-service education. And that's what we need to really focus on nowadays. Because all the educational changes in our country based on the research done in the country, we renewed our curriculum rather dramatically in 2016. And this work is still going on. All teachers are not engaged in our new national core curriculum, and we need some in-service training for them to help to implement the current basic education curriculum. And these changes or these developments are now under the National Teacher Education Forum. We have established this kind of teacher educators collaboration forum where all universities, all teacher education units are working together for these developmental issues or these challenges recognized in our country. To understand better why we want to do that, this is my figure which refers very much for the Patrick's alignment issues, that why teacher education must reflect the basic education and the issues what happen in society. This is very much what we do in Finland as well. We always observe and recognize the social needs in different sectors. So research what teacher educators are required to do all the time. Focus on the issues, what happens in the society. These outcomes are reflected with those who are doing or preparing national core curriculum. National core curriculum to the needs what is in society. And all these are reflected to the teacher education. So what happens in society, what happens in basic education, has taken account in teacher education programs. And that's the one reason I think that we don't have had, we haven't had teacher standards, because this process, what is here is an continuous. It's happening all the time. This reflection happens systematically all the time, and we communicate. All these sectors are communicating together. And the role of the government, the Ministry of Education, is there involved. they regulate mainly the economical issues. So they provide the funding for teacher education, but also putting the funding for those issues what are really needed in the country. So for example, this time, more research is needed to become out from the teacher education. They give us more money in terms of research than in terms of education. And based on these discussions, what happens in the society, this Teacher Education Forum has set some visions for the future and some strategies for the future. So we have to have a coherent understanding, the unified understanding in the country, where we are aiming for. So as we have recognized, some teacher educators think very personally, very individual way about the competencies, for example. It works not like this. If we can make a good standards education, we have had a unified understanding of the aims, visions, and strategies, where we really want to go. And now this Teacher Education Forum has published some key points for all teacher education units, what we really need to focus on. We need to focus on this holistic understanding of teachers' profession. What kind of skills we need to educate for them to reach the equal level in all different units. To put more power with the appropriate selections and preparations. How we can keep the good standards with all applicants. How we can select the best students. Yesterday we talked lots about the passion. How we can select those students who have this passion to work in the society where we have a lot of the challenges like we have heard here. It's the same in our country as well. How we can make these selections better. How we can increase teachers' creativity and highlight the student-centered approaches. We have listened many ways during these 2 days about these 21st century skills, and now it's coming out in our vision also for teacher education. In future, teachers are really creators of learning environments. They are like the facilitators of learning processes. They need to have the self-regulation, creativity, to be able to work in the future classrooms. Student-centered approach is already a well-known phrase in Finland. Already in beginning of 2000, basic education very much highlighted the student-centered approach, but it has not been very common in university level. We still have this kind of big lectures there. We still have some exams. But now we are going to reduce the number of those and putting students, their hands to working with their hands in collaboration and training for these 21st century skills. And now it's in our teacher education vision. There is no choice anymore to go the other ways. We have to focus on those issues. In small country like we are, it's a strength to collaborate with the other stakeholders. It's our power. So there is now governmental support to universities to establish a joint research projects, and not only with the other teacher education units, also the universities of applied sciences or other disciplines. I have, for example, on several projects done with the forest sciences. how bioenergy, for issues are discussed in the schools. We can find in education the several common issues which are relevant for the society to share with the other disciplines. And that's what we really need. Teacher education cannot be isolated from the other university areas. Leadership. We have talked about leadership and school principals, their power and their strengths. That's also what we want to highlight in the future. The competent leadership makes the communities more work-able, capable, and also it's a very important issue in teachers' well-being. We have done a lot of research in recent few years about the teachers' well-being, and that's one of the core issues what we want to also highlight. And what I already mentioned, the research is something what we really want to develop. It's a requirement for all teacher educators to participate in the research work. Our teacher education programs, the contents and the skills, what we teach to our students, they based on the research what the colleagues and the teacher educators themselves have done. It's not based on only their experience, but it's the evidence-based teaching. And that's why if you as a teacher educator can develop your own professional competence, you have to be involved in the research work. And these are the main visions and strategies what we want to now highlight in coming future. And we also want to see the teacher education as a path for the society. We really want to select the best students from the country to our program. We want to educate them in a way that they will survive in future society, and they are able to provide those knowledge and skills for their pupils for the future society. So teacher education has to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of the basic education or the current issues in the society. We have to always look over and what is coming and be prepared for that. And that's why we want to see as an increasing arrow, or arrow which is looking for the future, to looking that what is there coming, how we can prepare our young generation for the future society. I think that's something common for all us small countries, because it's a high competition about in international field, and human capital is something where we can put emphasis on, and that's our role in terms of that issue. And as I was asked to talk about the student selection approaches, it is true that according to research, the selection plays a crucial role when we are identifying good applicants for the education. So we really have to think about what are the methods and what are the best approaches for selecting the students who can really work towards this vision. Who are those age changers for future society? And that's why we have now started to revise our mechanisms for student selections. And We have now worked a couple of years already to think about these competencies. So, teacher competence map, what is created for this purpose, is now almost ready. It's here. You can see and it's a background, it's a framework. It's our theoretical framework for the student selections. There are like personal competencies which are reflected within specific situational skills. Students have to have a decision-making skills, they have to have an interpretation skills, perceptions. They have to mirror these in classroom level, at the same time in a national level, for example, when they are writing a national core curriculum. But, last but not least, the main goal is a child. To guarantee that those teachers are able to increase learning outcomes, increase the student motivation, but first of all, joy of learning. That's what we talked yesterday. That's the most important, that student will enjoy, because enjoyment leads to motivation, and motivation leads to the outcomes, good outcomes. I have only a few minutes time, so I will rather quickly introduce these dimensions of competencies. But good knowledge base about what is teaching and learning. What we really mean teaching and learning is significant, of course, in teacher profession. In Finland, we don't really much put emphasis on content knowledge in our education, because they are just arrived from the 12 years basic education. They have lots of content knowledge. But we emphasize the pedagogical knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge. We help them to understand how this scientific knowledge is transferred to the school context, age-appropriate methods. We emphasize these 21st century skills, this creativity especially. Teachers have to create the learning environments which support the students' learning. How we create environments when we have 47 students in the classroom, or how we create a learning environments when we have 5 different languages in the classroom. That's what is the teacher's duty. See, think about these methods and ways to solve these everyday problems. They have to communicate. They have to be able to work in collaborative way. Because the challenges, for example, in multiculturalism, multilingualism, learning difficulties, it's not only one teacher who can cover everything. It's as Patrick mentioned, we need the other colleagues around us. We need the PhD students. We need special teachers. We need the school principals. They have to work as a team. That's the resource. And that's what we teach to them, to be able to collaborate with the other professionals. And of course, personal orientations are always involved. What is your passion? That's your personal orientation, what you really value. And as I mentioned, it's also very important to think about the teachers' well-being and their scoping strategies. Lots of our students, they have a passion. They really think that I'm really for the children, and they work a lot. They put lots of efforts to help and support the students. And that's why we also need to keep a balance their well-being and support them by providing in-service education, by providing the professional support, by providing a community support. And that's the one of the competence also what they really have to be able to use. So this is the framework for the student selections in general. And now in our selection phase, we use this model. We select some areas for our entrance exams to be able to measure how they are able to study in the university, how they are ready for studies in teacher education. We don't really evaluate their content knowledge, how good they are in maths, how good they are in English, but we look and focus their suitability, their abilities to study in university and their suitability to work as a teacher. And we need this selection process to be able to select the best students. We have a lot of applicants. We cannot cover everybody, so we have to do this selection. But it's also some way of monitoring the quality for the students' skills, knowledge and skills, because they don't have really exams in the end of their education. So we have to guarantee already in the beginning that the quality of the student cohort is in high level. And that's why we have a two-phase selection procedure. We have a national exam, then we have a local suitability tests, and then we make a final selection process, which is very much the administrative one. This vakava examination, which it comes from the Finnish words a national educational selection procedure. Vakava is a Finnish word and means serious. And this is for everyone. Everyone who wants to become part of it can come. All universities organize it in same day, in same time. And there is seats for everyone. It's a multiple choice test where the students' skills from this first box, not first box, was it second box, this problem solving and critical thinking and reflections are measured. So they have to read few scientific articles before they come to the examination, which are linked to the teacher education, societal challenges in education, and they have to be able to respond in terms of these articles to the questions or multiple choice statements, and those are really not measuring the content, but they're able to critical think those things and solve the problems or apply the knowledge for the different contexts. And that happens in the same way in all universities, in all teacher education units in the country. And then second phase, third of this first period, the first phase will be selected through the interview and group assignment, where their suitability for the teacher's profession is measured. What kind of social skills they have? You remember this map, there was a communication skills. Are they able to share their knowledge? Are they eager to collaborate? What is their passion? How aware they are teachers' profession? How motivated they are? And this happens in local universities. So each student has to select a university where they want to study. And based on this first phase, they are selected to the interview. And only the 30% can access the second phase. And then, based on the scores from the first phase and the scores from the second phase, they are giving the final scores. And 10% of the applicants are selected for the programs. So it's very highly competed. So they really have to focus on the issues, what we are asking for them, and that's what they gives them a picture that what is this education for? Because those are the issues what we are taking account in the selection procedure. We really focus on during the education the same issues. I just want to highlight the issue that all this selection procedure covers our all teacher education programs. So we have different programs for class teaching, early childhood teacher education, special education, or counselors, for example. But all this procedure and this teacher competence maps goes for all programs because the bachelor level of education is aiming for basic teacher skills. They all are working as a teacher. What are those basic skills? And in master level, they focus on their specific contexts. Counselors are more focusing on counseling. Early childhood education is more focusing on, early childhood education is only bachelor, but for example, class teacher education is more focusing on class teaching. So all of, except the early childhood teacher education, all others are master level courses. If I have time shortly, no time anymore, okay. This was the only what I would like to tell you is how government is supporting the different contents for our teacher education, and these are now the projects which are going on. But if you are interested more detail any of those projects, let me know. I'm happy to tell you in coffee break or later today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite Professor Matengu, who will actually give the national context, but firstly maybe to highlight the key issues emanating from the keynote speak, and then locate it in the national, sub-regional, and regional context. But before we do that, I would like to give a gift to the keynote speaker. Professor Matengu. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kudumo. Let me start by saying the picture that you showed reminded me. I think it is Collie. And that particular space I have fished in summer, and I have driven over it in winter with a car. That is how cold it gets there, that the lakes are frozen and you can drive with a car on a lake. So it was a good reminder. A 9-year-old boy asked his father, "Daddy, what is politics?" And then the father thought carefully, how could he respond to this? And he said, let me put it to you this way. You are the people. I provide. Your mother gives me the money, so she is the government. I provide, so I am the capitalist. You are the people, you receive what I give. Your young brother is the future, and the maid who looks after you is the working class. And so he said, do you understand? The boy said, well, kind of. Now, in the middle of the night, the boy hears his younger brother crying. And he wonders why that there's nobody reacting. So he goes to check his younger brother and finds that he has messed himself. The napkin has other things that irritates. So he goes to check his mother and finds that the mother is asleep. He decides not to disturb. He goes to the maid's room and finds his father doing something with the maid, and he decides not to disturb. He goes back to sleep. The following morning during breakfast, he tells Daddy, I think now I understand what politics is. While the government is asleep, the capitalist is exploiting the working class. The people are ignored, while the future is in deep shit. Now, the question that has been asked, I think, in the presentation is, what is quality teacher education of the 21st century? And maybe you'll understand why I started with that joke. Because education cannot be divorced from society and from politics. Now, in the Finnish system, very key to the education foundation is the issue of well-being and welfare of everyone. And that is why in the Finnish education system, education is free from kindergarten to PhD, because it is meant to promote the well-being of everyone. And that foundation has meant that certain laws have been made in Finland that allows that to happen. For example, anybody who is working, whether you are a man or a woman, as long as you are a father or a mother, you can take paternal leave or maternity leave. And there is legislation that gives a right for every child to be in kindergarten, to allow whether the parent is working or not, although I understand that in the recent government that has changed a bit. But it is a right for everyone to have education. But it also tells us that both basic education and tertiary education are not there for their own sake. They are to respond to the social and economic needs of the country across the different sectors. And this means monitoring and evaluation of the performance of the education system is of everybody's interest. It's not just for the Ministry of Education. And I believe that is what gives value to the profession of teaching in Finland. But the mere fact that education responds to the different sectors also means that it has to be very agile and in how it responds to the different challenges. So the issue of curriculum development and reviews is very much left to the universities, actually to the faculties. From what I have learned, it is left to the faculties to respond as they interact with the industry. Because as we know, the 21st century needs skills are changing very, very fast. I do remember when I was doing my master's there, that our curriculum changed in that 3-year period. It changed twice. Because planning and development was also taking a different course. The European Union that time had a different support mechanisms for planning and development that education institutions needed to respond to. And I think the point I'm trying to drive here is that the national philosophy of education's purpose has to be defined at a national level for every higher education institution to tap from and direct its own mission and mandate. I am not so sure to what level it is clearly defined in this country. Or is it just left to the higher education institutions to train as they see fit? I think it is an important point that we must keep in mind. The vision and the key strategic areas of focus are also nationally defined. And that's why there is a system through which selection is based. It's nationally defined and everybody complies with that. And the unique feature of Finland, from what I know, is that once a legislation is passed, it takes 2 to 3 months to begin implementation. Even when the European Union takes a decision, the Finnish government will implement it in 2 to 3 months. Because everybody else knows that there are specific key strategic areas that needs to be responded to, because those decisions are evidence-based. One challenge for us, I think, is the issue of heterogeneity and homogeneity of society. Also in terms of the economic standings here. Now, the Finnish education or the Finnish society for a long time, it was very homogeneous. Although there are different dialects in the different areas, but it has been very much homogeneous, and so it was quite easy to do. And it is a society that is based on one value, and that's of trust. And I think this is also a very important lesson for us, because a nation that doesn't trust itself introduces insecurities, and because it has insecurities, it can't decide. Always fears that if I decide this, there will be other consequences. Now, over the years, this has been changing because of the intake and incoming of immigrants. And they have had to change also to see how multiculturalism becomes infused in the education system. And hence, in my view, the map of competencies that has now been introduced. What I think also challenges our system here is that although there may be clear parameters that are defined in our legislation, but the types of teachers that we want is not deliberately pursued to get to the situation where certain competencies are clear. A competent teacher in Ivirivinzi or in Oshkuku may not necessarily be a competent teacher in Windhoek. But The point is, this particular teacher must be able to adjust, and therefore, that is why you see in the map of competencies in Finland, situation-specific skills are also deliberately taught and encouraged. Because you can't apply what you teach in Windhoek in some other, in a village like Tses, which has a different setup. Another complementary fact to this, from what I know, is the process of what they call substitute teachers. Now, the substitute teachers are actually students, university students who are maybe in their third year. And the system, I was surprised, is so flexible that there is a sort of a database in which you can call. If you are having a flu, tomorrow you can't be in class, a substitute will come in and teach. But our system is not this flexible. A teacher can be on sick leave for a week or more, and nobody takes over, isn't it? So I think the issue of flexibility there is also important for us. The other thing that I have noticed from my colleagues and friends who are teachers is mobility and the importance of exchange. That they are all the time looking at what is working in another region that they could adopt. And the Ministry of Education sponsors these research projects to see what is working in Tampere region and how could this be diffused to Karelia. And we could do the same here. We know some regions that are consistently performing very well, but are we taking effort in sharing, in really understanding what is happening in those regions that could be diffused to other regions as a way of increasing effectiveness. Then besides the teacher, in the Finnish education system, you will also find a nurse. Is that still the case? Yeah. You would also find a nurse who takes care of the development and the health, overall health of a child. And I think these are some of the things I think we need to be thinking about if we are to raise a child wholly. Of course, the school counselors are also there, and other professions may be drawn in as need be. The last aspect that I would like to point out is also the fact that the Finnish education system, I think all teacher training universities have also a university teaching school. And that university teaching school is a ground for research, for improving pedagogy, for taking research results and infusing them in curriculum. And it's not surprising to find a PhD teaching grade 1. Now, our system here, if you get a PhD and you are in primary school, what happens to you? Huh? I'm not hearing what happens. Yeah. You are either promoted or you are considered to be overqualified. And the same is true if you have a master's degree. And so our system must not take its best out. It must keep its best. And I think that's something we need to learn. Now, very final comments regarding selection process. There are some lessons for us. Competencies are important, but in the Finnish system, there is no automatic admission to teacher education. There is a threshold. As you have heard, only 10% of all the applicants get in the system. This avoids what my friend Prof. Mushgeni put as the taxonomy of teachers. The real teacher who does research, the cocktail teacher who thrives in the Kambashus after work, the deadwood teacher who cares less about research, doesn't innovate, prefers to recycle everything that he has learned at the university, and doesn't take care to abreast himself with the new challenges. And lastly, the earth teacher who should have resigned a long time ago. So I think the issue of threshold is important for us, and the issue of one suitability test there as a uniform way of measuring who can get into the system is important. Finally, the Finnish system also has challenges in my view. The issue of dropout in the number of applicants may be related to a number of things, one of which is that because of the legislation around the regulation or moderation of behavior in class is very strict. Even just doing this to a child can lead you into trouble. And therefore, people are also considering how will I conduct myself in such a situation? And it's no longer just about the skills, but also the ability to be able to manage behavior of children. The issue of bullying is also a serious issue, bullying teachers and bullying fellow learners. All these, I think, are challenges that are affecting, but I think we can learn from them. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. At this juncture, we are going to break and come back exactly as indicated on the program. Even if there are a few people there, we'll start. Enjoy your tea and let's come back in time so that we can start exactly in time and engage on what they have said. Thank you very much.